Hello, everyone. This is Chmura, and you're at our webinar, Childcare Access as a Workforce Competitiveness Factor. Let's give everyone just 1 or 2 more minutes to come in. I see some people still coming in. Then we'll get started. Hello, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm Chmura, and I'll be moderating this webinar for you entitled Childcare Access as a Workforce Competitiveness Factor. So some background about Chmura before we get started for those who might not know us. We provide labor market data and analysis to help you make informed decisions, whether it's your community or your business, to help you thrive. Our team is about 55 or so economists, data scientists, statisticians, and business professionals who really do care much about helping your community and business. Founded in 1988, we have offices in Richmond, Virginia, our headquarters in Cleveland, Ohio, and we're really driven by client success and satisfaction. And really at the top of everything we do, it's excellence in providing customer service and data quality. Some of the markets we serve are shown here: economic development, corporate, education, staffing, site selection, workforce development, both on the consulting and on the software side. Many of you probably use our Jobs EQ tool. And here are some of our clients. You can see some of the top consulting groups, as well as economic developers and workforce and educators from around the nation. One thing we'd like to offer you that we do on a weekly basis is an economic update. We send it out every weekend, and it's something where we go over what numbers are coming out this week, what came out last week, what does it mean, what is the Fed saying, what does that mean about interest rates, and then a financial overview and a forecast. So if you'd like to get that, you can go to our website, the very bottom, and sign up for it, or click on this link. Which reminds me of a couple of housekeeping items I should have mentioned by now. You will be getting the slides and the recording of this webinar either at the end of the day or tomorrow morning. And also, please do ask questions on the right-hand side. Put your questions in the Q&A, and we will either answer them as we're going along, or we'll wait until the end of this presentation to answer those questions. So with that, we have with us Peta, who is with Rojas and Associates, and she'll be giving you an overview about her firm just before she starts to speak. But Peta is a researcher and consultant who helps mission-driven organizations strengthen their impact in workforce development and economic mobility. She specializes in evaluating and improving programs that support marginalized workers and communities. She has a PhD in social policy and more than a decade of applied research experience. She brings a rigorous, equity-centered lens to her work. She focuses on building organizational capacity so teams can sustain meaningful change. And as I said, she'll give you more of an overview of her company just before we get to her slides. But first, we're going to have Francesco speak. Francesco is a labor economist, has been with us for a few years, and has over 20 years of academic experience prior to that. and then Peter will follow up. But Francesca will start with the big picture. She's sort of lay the stage of the state of the childcare sector, and then Peter will talk about closing the childcare gap to grow local economies with an eye toward some of the solutions that are out there. And then finally, we'll end with the Q&A. So with that, Francesca, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chris. I hope you can hear me well. And I wanna, this is an exciting topic, a topic that has been at the heart of Chmura for a very long time, actually for 20 years. We have been pioneered this type of analysis before it became a hot topic that is on the agenda of several other consulting companies. Back in 2006, in fact, Chmura conducted a study. It was limited in scope to only the Richmond area region, but it was already extremely important to understand what are some of the major drivers and the major issues in the childcare sector. Back then, so more than 20 years ago, or about 20 years ago, we found that locally in the Greater Richmond region, almost 25% of the businesses indicated that childcare was already a problem. These problems have clearly become even more severe post-pandemic, and we're going to see, we're going to learn more about that, and Peter is going to discuss some of the possible solutions. Back in 2006, almost 86% of the businesses that we interviewed, they perceived that childcare was affecting the revenue of the company, either because lack of access to childcare services was a reason for the employee absenteeism, because it distracted workers on the workplace and so decreased the productivity of the worker, because it was an obstacle to recruiting the best candidates out there because of lack of access to childcare services, and because many people or many workers, mostly women, as we're going to see later, but they had to give up on their job opportunity or in a promotion because of their life choices, increased turnover of the company, which we know turnover is a big increase in the cost of production because you have of the training to replace the vacant position. So because of all this issue, and especially the high cost of childcare, which is, I'm going to show you some numbers, especially for infant care, that is less than 12 months of the child, are extremely high. Then you have that the pool of potential candidates available to firms is considerably reduced, thus raising an issue of attracting the amount of workers that is needed to push your region to the next level. And therefore, childcare sector can become a strategy to attract, to become more competitive and be on the forefront of attracting qualified, skilled workers in your region. In fact, back then in 2006, and those are really like old numbers, 8% of their respondents to our survey, they said that they had to quit their job, or their partner had to quit the job due to the lack of available childcare in the sector. And another almost 9% of the survey respondents, they decline a job offer or a promotion due to the same fact, the lack of the childcare childcare services. So how much has changed since 2006? Unfortunately, not much. And actually, all the changes have gone in the opposite direction. This is something that probably Peter will talk more about, but I want to just give some brief overview of what's going on in more recent times. According to the National Association of Manufacturers, childcare is the main reason why there is a persisting skill gap in the industry. And we're talking an industry that historically has geared toward a male workforce, but even in this industry, giving access to childcare is a pressing issue, one that could solve the persisting skill gap in the area. among all the people, according to a recent study by the Harvard Business School, 80% of workers which have some caregiving responsibility admitted that lack of childcare is affecting their productivity all the time, 33%, most of the time 14%, and 36% of the time sometimes. So it's affecting a big part of our workforce, and with a pretty considerable cost. So back in 2023, so only 2 years ago, it was estimated that the cost of only childcare for children under the age of 3, so it's not the entire cost of childcare, only limited to caregivers with children under the age of 3, the business cost, the annual average business cost was more than $1,500 per worker, which total almost $23 billion annually for the entire country. So those are big numbers, and we're going to see that businesses could actually remediate some of these costs by providing services. What kind of services could businesses provide? There is, again, Peter is going to go through all of this. So we're going to provide some solutions. One that I would love to provide, to suggest here, is that many people point to the government stepping in and solve the problem, and definitely a collaboration between the private sector and the public sector is needed. But I would love to point out to you guys a recent study by the Boston Consulting Group, BGC, which recently looked at 5 case studies of 5 regions. Actually, one, I still Steamboat Sky Resort. I see in the chat, we actually have in the house somebody from that region in Colorado. That was part of this pilot study. And the chart in front of you shows the ROI, the return on investment for each dollar that employers invest in childcare. What is the return in terms of saving costs from absenteeism, retention, and turnover? And as you see, in one case, it's like for each dollar, you get 90 cents back, so almost 1-to-1. But for the other 4 case studies, the return on investment was extremely high, all the way for each dollar to $4.25 in return. Why do we have such a widespread range of ROIs? Well, because those are 5 completely different industries, and the turnover and the training cost change dramatically. So of course you would expect the ROI to change depending if you are an e-commerce company versus a more like retail-oriented company, if you are a financial company, or if you're a supply chain company, which are all represented in the sample of industries that BGC reviewed. But the main message here is that there is space for everybody to, from an employer point of view, to actually invest in childcare services for its workers, and to have actually a net positive return on that investment. But let's talk about a little bit of the state of the industry right now. Of all the childcare services, the most expensive one is the one for infant care, and the cost of, as you would expect, changes dramatically from state to state. But as you can see, in some states is extremely high. Massachusetts, the average annual cost for childcare in 2025, so this year, is about almost $30,000 a year. So it's extremely high. We're also talking about a state where average annual wages are really high. So an important point is, well, let's see the relative cost to the average income of the people, of the residents in that state. You know, like another state that has very high annual cost is California, but we also know that California has higher wages. So when we look at the percentage of the cost of childcare as a share of the median income, the next slide, then this is the picture of the United States. Again, Massachusetts, again, leading the nation in terms of the burden of childcare, with more than 13% of the median income for a married couple with children going toward childcare. But a surprise is New Mexico or Kansas, where in the previous slide, I'm going to go back. As you can see in the previous slide, those are states where the annual costs are pretty low, but still in relative terms, given the income in the region, they represent a serious burden for married couples with children, with more than 13% of the income allocated toward childcare in these states. Overall, again, a lot of diversity in terms of the burden across the nation. What is more important is that the chart that in front of us, that is from Childcare Aware of America, looks at the median income of a married couple. More recently, here at Chmura, and actually like this past summer, just a few months ago, we conducted also a study for a client. A part of the study of the client that was looking at the living wage for their own region. We also computed the burden of childcare cost for the entire nation. And although in the previous slide we said that the highest burden is 13% of the income, well, that was because it was looking at two adults with children. What we found is that if the household is made of one adult with children, if it is one child or two child, then the burden becomes much larger, almost from anything between 20 and 25% of the estimated annual living wage goes toward childcare cost. So I would like to point out, to a number here. Let's look at the one adult with one child that is 3 years old. The estimated annual childcare cost in 2024 is almost $10,000. That is more, and if not more, is comparable to what would be a typical in-state tuition of a public institution, public university in United States. So the cost of a child under the age of 3 is equivalent to the tuition of a in-state public institution in the United States. Just to give you an idea of a scale of the magnitude of the cost. Moving on, what is the distribution of providers? So as you see in the United States, seems like the state of Illinois is leading the nation in terms of number of child care providers. A caveat to this study, which is using data from the Office of Child Care, but I also use data from Chmura about the population of the state. So it looks like Illinois is leading the nation in terms of number of childcare providers per 1,000 residents. However, keep in mind that this is just pure number of providers. It does not, and I did not have access to the information of whether the provider had only a capacity of three children versus 20 children. So it's not the total actual capacity because it's only the number of providers, not the size of the children they are served at each provider. But still, it gives us some idea that there's a high concentration in Illinois, which piqued my interest. Why is that Illinois has a much higher concentration of providers compared to other states? And so my answer is that looks like Illinois has the lowest level of regulation in terms of who can be a provider, because Illinois is also leading the country in terms of the number of unregulated providers. So one possible solution to solve this issue of what is called childcare desert, which refers to to zip codes where the number of providers is not sufficient to serve all the needs of the region in terms of children under the age of 5 in that region. One possible solution is to relax the regulation and allow for more unregulated providers, which was the option adopted in the state of Illinois. In terms of the total employment of the sector, we all remember that the sector was hit pretty bad by COVID for obvious reasons. We all, it's been likely far enough that we don't have to deal with the consequences, but we all remember what happened during COVID. The sector has quickly recovered, and we have now surpassed the total level of employment compared to the pre-COVID levels. However, there is always an however. However, if we look at the entire employment, we're missing an important part of the employment in the childcare sector, which is self-employment. Although total employment has completely recovered from COVID, when we look at self-employment, the numbers are way down. And to be honest, that's not due per se to COVID. That downward trend started back at the beginning of the 2010 and has not stopped. Likely has plateaued, but although overall employment at centers has increased, we do see this decline of self-employment, which is what is usually likely to happen in what is called home care, a home child care, rather than in a center child care. So that's where it's another possible area of intervention. How can we boost self-employment in this sector that has been declining for 15 years now? In terms of wages, we know, as I'm going to show you later, wages in the sector are way below the average wages in the nation. But there is another things to observe, to note here, that they've been growing at the same, more or less at the same rate as the rest of the country up until the 2021, and then they have really accelerated in the United States. That's when the country was recovering from COVID, when we reopened all the schools and we were trying to go back to our normal way of life, and the demand for childcare really skyrocketed. Most companies were starting to recall their workers to the workplace, and so the needs for childcare became really present. And because of the huge drop of the labor force from the sector, then as we know from an economic point of view, the response is for wages to go up to try to attract people to the sector that was hit pretty bad by the COVID, and that led to a spike in wages. So wages were low and are still low in the sector, but they really accelerated in 2021 and 2022, way above the average for the rest of the country. However, more recently, they've been declining, and if we notice since 2024, they've been growing at a slower rate than the rest of the country, which is going to pose possibly more issues in the future. How can we attract workers in this fundamental sector for the prosperity of a region, given that wages are not growing as fast as other sector of the economy? And who is the sector employing? The sector tends to be either younger than the rest of the population. In fact, about 12.5% of the U.S. population, or the U.S. workforce population, is under the age of 24. But when we look at specifically the childcare workers, then we find that more than 22% of the population is actually under the age of 24. So there are other much younger than the rest of the workforce. Or if you look at the opposite end of the spectrum, we do notice that they tend to be a little bit older than the rest, or the percentage, to be more precise, the percentage of people of age 65 and older is a bit higher than the rest of the population. So it's at the beginning of the career of the individual, and often turns to be also a decision of that individuals can take once they may be retired from their primary activity, and they decide, but they're not ready to be 100% retired. So they come back to the labor market after the age of 65. So not exactly the same demographic as the entire population, but either much younger or a bit older. In terms of education, probably not surprisingly, is not a sector that requires a lot of formal training. In fact, almost 40% have at the most a high school degree. So it does not require advanced degrees, although that trend, as I'm going to show you later, is changing. That trend is changing. But overall, an associate degree or less is what most of the sector demands, with few exceptions, and with a quickly, rapidly change in these requirements, probably because due to changes in regulation in the sector. The sector is becoming more and more regulated over time, which leads to more formal education. And the last component, demographic, that I would like to show about the graph, which is probably not going to surprise anybody in the audience, is that the sector is heavily dominated by female workers, with almost 94% of the workforce being basically women. So as we get closer to the end of my portion of the presentation, a couple of things. If you look at the second column here, the mean annual wages, you see that for childcare workers, annual wages are way lower, almost half of it, of the average wages for the entire for all the other sectors. So wages are extremely lower. But then another thing that is important to notice is that if you compare the total demand forecast to the number of people that exit the sector due to retirement decisions, or transfer due to the fact that they move from this sector to a different career path, we notice that in the childcare sector, turnover is much higher than the national average for all the other sectors in the economy. So we're talking about a turnover of 16% every year. The sector has to replace 16% of its workforce due to people retiring or moving to other sectors of the economy, compared to an a national average of almost 11%. So it is very difficult. It's a sector where it's very difficult for employers to retain their workers, which is going to add more challenges to the sector growing. And finally, well, no, a couple more slides. So we notice that employment is growing, but as of now, we have not seen the acceleration in job posts that we have seen that it was noted for the entire economy. So I should have probably had a comparison, but when you look at the entire United States, after COVID, there was this huge spike in the demand for job openings, and we don't see that one in childcare services. So although it is a much needed sector, it seems like we're still lagging behind in terms of growth from the employer point of view of creating new jobs in a sector where it is a fundamental sector to attract other jobs in a region. Somehow job posts have been flat all the way since the recession. They have not mirrored the big spike of all the other sectors. It would be interesting to know from the audience if you have some ideas of why that was the case, or what some are the challenges that are preventing employers for actually expanding and hiring. And as I mentioned earlier, the level of regulation is increasing in the sector, which is leading to a demand for more formal training. And the training is mostly, those are the degrees that are actually, or the programs that are actually in high demand in this sector. Nothing of this, what you see on the slide in front of you should be particularly surprising. Education is the number one program, child development, followed by early childhood education, and so on and so forth. Those are all probably expected programs that lead into, this would be more like higher level positions, more managerial positions within childcare services. And finally, where is the award gap? Probably I was surprised. I have to admit, I was surprised to show, but I'm glad to share these results with all of you. I looked at the four major geographical regions in the United States: the Midwest, the South, the Pacific North, the West, and the Northeast. And what I noticed, what I learned is that out of the 10 most largest gaps in terms of award, and a gap is the gap between how many educated, how many trained people we need in that area, given the demand for degrees in that area, compared to how many the region is actually producing. So when we look at the Midwest, so we're not surprised to see medical occupations to be the one in largest shortage. But after the first three, the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more in largest gaps in the Midwest are all positions, are all programs related to childcare. You know, those are the programs that I showed you earlier. They lead to positions in childcare services. So definitely, it's for all of you that are in the Midwest, trying to push more higher enrollment in one of these programs seems to be a fundamental strategy, because it is expected to the region is expected to face some pretty large award gaps in childcare services. I also noticed a very similar gap in the Northeast with child development, child care and support service management, early childhood and family study, family and community services, and child care provider assistant being among the 10 most largest awards gap in the Northeast. I did not observe any large gaps in the other two regions, in the West and in the South. I think that the reason why we don't see those gaps in the rest of the country is interesting. I think that in the South is because somehow there is no much demand for these services in the South. In fact, if I go back to this chart here, the South has a very low number of providers. So somehow it's lagging behind in the supply of services, and therefore the demand for workers to work in that sector, as you see, is pretty pale here. And probably in the West is because there are already enough providers that the system is more imbalanced, or more balanced than the rest of the country. This is all I have for you. Let me go back to the transition slide.
Thank you, Francesco. Very interesting, and sorry to see that things have not improved much over the many years. And we're looking forward to hearing some of the solutions that Peter has for us. But before we start with Peter, we thought we'd ask you, the audience, 2 questions. So Anna, if you could load up that first question, and if you could click on polls, you can see the question, and if you would please answer that question. And we already have some people answering it. Does access to childcare influence whether businesses choose to locate or expand in your region? Well, it seems like sometimes and often are definitely the 2 answers coming up most. Okay, thank you. And for that, ending that, we can go ahead and ask one more question, and then we'll get started with PETA. Which of the following is the most important driver when firms decide to expand or relocate in your region? So pick, actually, are they allowed to pick 3 here, or are we only picking 1? It looks like we're only picking 1. So labor is coming up, and then buildings are land. Interesting, childcare is not. More recently, as we've talked to economic developers, we've heard childcare as coming up as number 3, but since we were only giving you the most important factor, I can see why labor is number 1 and land is number 2. And then housing too, most recently has been coming up among economic developers as an issue. So thank you for answering those questions. We can end the poll. And I see you've had a lot of good discussion as Francesco has been talking. So we'll hold off on answering questions until we get to the end. So Peta, thank you for presenting with us.
Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Peta Blakely, Managing Principal at Rojas, Blakely and Associates, and thanks to Chmura for hosting this event today. Before we dive in, a quick word about my firm. Rojas, Blakely and Associates is a research, evaluation, and organizational development consulting firm that works in workforce development and economic mobility. We help communities and nonprofits understand what's working, what's not, and how to build the structures that support families and communities. Today, I'm going to be making the case that childcare isn't a social support. It's a core piece of workforce infrastructure, and that the gaps and burdens in childcare ripple through labor markets and economic mobility. So I see in this poll here that available labor is the number 1 issue in firm location, and I'm going to make the case that if you want more available labor, you should pay attention to childcare. According to KPMG's Parental Work Disruption Index, 58% of working parents have had to leave at least 1 job. That's more than just a financial hardship. That shows up as stalled career paths, incomplete training enrollments, unexpected turnover, people who can't be promoted because they can't work full time, unstable staffing. It's a real drag on talent pipelines and regional competitiveness. A quick note here, I'm talking about childcare, which includes childcare centers, family or home-based care, and out-of-school time care or after-school care. And I'm going to use the terms childcare and early childhood education somewhat interchangeably, even though they're not exactly the same thing. Early childhood education is a key part of childcare. And the benefits of high quality early childhood education are really well documented, but we're going to focus here on childcare as providing safe and nurturing spaces for children to be so that parents and carers can manage their responsibilities. So one of the issues that Francesco talked about was people can't afford childcare. The national average cost of childcare is about $10,000 a year. In high cost areas like Washington or Boston, it can be over $30,000 a year. And affordability matters a lot. Many families find themselves spending unsustainable portions of their income on care. And the expense contributes to many parents leaving the workforce altogether. Recent data from PolicyMap shows that depending on location and age of child, full-day infant care can cost anywhere between 5% and 30% of the median family income. And for older school-age children, part-time or after school care can still cost up to 20% of median family income. It's often as much as families are spending on housing. And child care costs push over 100,000 families who are barely above the poverty line into poverty every year. So some strategies include tax credits. We've probably heard a lot about tax credits. 26 states offer a tax credit either to employers or parents. The Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit is up to $6,000 and can be refundable up to 50% for lower income families. But this is only for the families who are working, right, and can find care. Even if they could afford it, there is not enough care to get. Across the US, we're short about 4.2 million childcare slots, and that is simply comparing the number of children to the number of childcare spaces. It doesn't account for the match. It's a 28% national supply gap. Combine that shortage with rising costs, wait lists of 6 months, inconsistent provider supply, and you have real structural barriers to workforce participation. And these calculations are based on parents who are in the workforce. So there are other parents and caregivers who are not even engaged at all. And this availability is based on there being a slot within a reasonable drive. It does not account for whether that's the right care for that family, whether it's linguistically or culturally appropriate, whether that family might have transportation barriers, whether a 5-mile drive is actually reasonable where you live. And the barriers are especially high for lower income workers, and particularly those who work other than 9 to 5 hours. So healthcare, retail, hospitality, like again, predominantly female fields. At our firm, we conduct several evaluations or studies of workforce initiatives every year and see that access to childcare is one of the top 3 barriers to employment for every single group that we look at. Immigrants, individuals who've been impacted by incarceration, individuals who are participating in job training. The only group where it's not a number 1 issue has been high school students, even though it's still an issue for them. In job training, it's still an issue even after so many job training programs use access to childcare as a prerequisite to participate in their program. So this is a structural issue. What can we do? There is precedent for the federal government doing something. During the Second World War, the United States provided child care grants to the states under the Lanham Act. The states opened Lanham Act centers that served 500,000 children with fees of about $15 a day in our money. And they did this because they needed women to enter the workforce. And it worked. Women entered the workforce and factories were able to meet production demands. I see a question here about employer or parent credits. So what that would mean would be a tax credit to an employer if they are providing, if they have an on-site childcare or if they're providing a childcare subsidy to their employees, that could be credited against their taxes. Or a credit to a family would mean if you're paying for childcare expenses, you can get a tax credit for that. We'll talk about an example in Wisconsin in a couple of minutes. So Lanham 2 is the CHIPS Act. We're seeing federal policy treat childcare as infrastructure again. The CHIPS Act, which funds semiconductor manufacturing, requires major grant recipients to create a childcare plan. You can build plans and create jobs, but if the workers don't have care, those jobs aren't going to be filled or aren't going to be reliably filled. And since it's a matter of national security that we have a reliable supply of semiconductors in the US, we require a reliable workforce. So the childcare plans allowed under the CHIPS Act could include things like providing on-site childcare or providing backup childcare or providing childcare subsidies. We had one project in Connecticut where every single employer we talked to told us that they had a hard time finding workers, save one, which happened to be a woman-owned manufacturing company. They had created a shift that aligned with the school day in their town and reported no problems with staffing. So when employers are building childcare needs into their business model, sometimes they can address their own problems. Here's another really interesting example, talking about just creating a whole new supply by reducing barriers to entry. Francesco talked about childcare entrepreneurship and childcare self-employment, and here's an interesting model. So most family childcare or home-based care is provided in a house. Almost all of it is provided in a house. Not everybody who would like to offer childcare has an appropriate house for various reasons, the housing affordability crisis being one of them. So here is an example of an organization that took the space element out of the equation. Nursery Early Childhood Early Education is a nonprofit that provides early education both through their own childcare centers and also through their network of family childcares. Post-COVID, they had a space that had been a childcare center that they were never able to reopen. They were just never able to staff it, to open it. And meanwhile, all of their growth was in their family childcare network. So they came up with this really interesting solution, which was to divide that childcare space into little pods and support 3 entrepreneurs to open new childcare businesses that run like family childcare within these little pods. It's like a co-working space for childcare. And in addition to space, these educators get assistance with their licensing process, enrollment, support, billing, and most importantly, quality coaching and camaraderie. They're with each other. So the impact is that they expand the childcare supply in a high need area and also create economic mobility for the educators. The vision here is that these educators would move onto their own spaces after 2 years. But there's also the possibility that these incubators could become an expansion model for nursery, or a way that childcare businesses could partner with employers. There are still empty spaces in downtown and in downtowns across the country, and a demand for childcare in those areas, but lots of employers who don't want to be in the childcare industry. Is this possibly a model that they could partner with an organization that would create these little pods? In Wisconsin, the state has taken another approach to facilitating the space issue. They discovered that there were a lot of childcare providers that weren't enrolling as many children as they were licensed for because of a space issue. It could be something like they didn't have a ramp. They had a room that wasn't kitted out appropriately to use as a classroom. So they created a program where they provide low interest loans to childcare providers, both centers and home-based, specifically for infrastructure improvements. And then if they can demonstrate that those improvements create more slots, the loans can be forgivable. Francesco talked about that 16% turnover rate in childcare education. Early educators often face low pay, high stress, limited career paths, and a sense of lack of support. Turnover creates its own turnover. The centers are understaffed, which makes the work that much more stressful and unpleasant, which leads to turnover, right? And then it's hard to recruit people into an unhappy organization. So retention is seen as the key to bringing the joy back to the field and a prerequisite for recruitment. In particular, a lot of educators leave after their first year. So Department of Early Education and Care in Massachusetts looked at mentoring as a way to address the isolation that can contribute to turnover in the field and to increase professionalism for early childhood education. They partnered with Holyoke Community College, which built and piloted a mentoring program in English and Spanish. The mentoring program showed that connections increased the confidence of the educators and their connection to the field, leading to better retention. Interestingly, the effect was just as powerful for the mentors as the mentees. The mentors felt recognized and appreciated, and being a mentor created an opportunity for them to use their expertise and experience without having to leave the classroom and go into administration. So the takeaways, 3 big takeaways. One is that childcare access shapes labor force participation. It's a workforce issue within a workforce issue. 2, creative solutions exist, and lots of them work. There are policy tools, there are business models, there are pipeline programs that can be really effective in addressing these challenges. And the third is childcare is infrastructure. You know, just as we pay for buses and highways to bring workers to their jobs, we should consider childcare basic workforce infrastructure. Thank you very much. And maybe Chris will help me find some questions.
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Very interesting, and I like those solutions. I have one question here from Madison. The stat, 26 states offer employer or parent credits. What does that mean? And can you provide some examples?
Sure. In another example from Wisconsin, a meat processing plant is providing, is essentially paying for educators for 3 shifts, right? It's subsidizing the cost of childcare for their 3 shifts a day because they want to have workers for 3 shifts a day, right? So they're creating this partnership. I think they receive a tax credit for that, meaning they get money back for the expense, but they get the benefit of having a reliable workforce for 3 shifts a day.
Okay, thank you. And then I also have a question. There's some discussion about the co-working for childcare they thought was brilliant. And so I think Jeff was asking with regard to nursery, did they pay the providers at a reasonable living wage so they could support themselves?
Yeah. So those providers are entrepreneurs. They own their own businesses, and how they get paid is based on the vast majority, I would say almost 100% of the children in these centers, their families are using vouchers. So what they pay is based on what the state pays for childcare. And then just like any other small business, they deduct their costs. They might have an assistant, they might have some other costs. They pay something towards the maintenance of their space. They don't pay anywhere near the entire cost of running their space, but they do make a monthly contribution. to their space, and then they keep the rest, like any small business. Childcare entrepreneurs generally make significantly more money than employees in childcare centers.
Okay, thank you. And then Francesco, there was a question here from David. Have there been studies of impact of childcare on workforce development or educational programs, e.g. impact of childcare on degree completion rate, impact of childcare on wage gains? It's the first question under the Q&A.
Yes, I responded to David privately, but probably it's good to talk, to talk to the entire audience. So because many women had to turn down the opportunity for a job promotion due to childcare responsibilities, implicitly there are studies, although they don't talk directly about wages, implicitly they are addressing the issue of the impact of the access to childcare to wage growth, at least because of promotion. I am not personally familiar with the literature looking at the impact on degree completion, so I'm not comfortable talking. I'm pretty sure that it exists, but I don't know what the conclusions are in that specific area.
Okay, Peter, do you have anything there?
The Institute for Women's Policy Research did something on the graduation rates of student parents. And there is I can't remember exactly what the findings are, but there is definitely a positive impact.
Okay, great. Either Peter or Francesco, we may have time for one more question. Do you see anything in the Q&A column, or does anyone else want to post another question there?
So I'm gonna answer to the entire audience what I responded to a specific question. I presented the estimated burden of childcare on terms of what is needed in terms of living wage for specific age compositions, which are driven by national averages. But yes, within consulting, we can actually customize the composition of the family, the household, to any specific need and any specific region that takes into account of the cost of living in the region and the age, the family composition in the region. Those are all based. The one that I reported in this presentation are only driven by national averages.
And I see from Tina, Virginia Works is developing a tool that makes it easy for an employer to contribute to the cost of childcare. Is there a website that people can go to, Tina, to learn more about that? If you're still there. Maybe not. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been very interesting. Francesco and Peter, thank you very much for participating. And we'll continue to have these webinars on a monthly basis. So please let us know if you'd like a specific topic. And if you're interested in more information about Jobs EQ, please reach out to Francesco, and more about Peter's firm, feel free to reach out to her. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.